Hey guys, thank you for joining us and welcome to the launch of Texas Crime Stories. I'm Erica Hernandez.
And I'm Leigh Waldman. So we started this podcast last year, and it was something Erica had a huge passion for. Originally, this was called South Texas Crime Stories, but because it was so popular by all of you listeners and viewers, we dropped the South and said, hey, let's expand it across the whole state because there's so much that happens here in the state of Texas.
And we kept getting viewers asking us, hey, look about this case over here and this case over here. And it kind of was just not in our window. And it was like, you know what, this is getting bigger. Let's make it a part of our window.
Yeah, we took a 2-month break, kind of a hiatus to rebrand, come up with new logos. Like it's on that side, yeah. Come up with new logos, come up with new ideas, and start expanding our horizons. What do we want to cover next? And there's so many huge crime stories that have happened in Texas, iconic crime stories that have changed the way people approach laws and policing. And so we decided, hey, let's just jump in feet first. And this is our official launch of it. So we're really excited, and we're excited for you all to be with us tonight.
Yes, and for our KSAT insiders for joining us. I know some of you are already on the chat. We're excited to chat with you once the episode starts. If you haven't, you can get on YouTube and watch along. This is just for our KSAT insiders. So I'm really excited that we get to do this for you guys and really talk to y'all about this podcast, why we do it, what's coming up, and it's just, I'm so excited. And excuse my voice, I'm just getting it back.
Yeah, she sounds a lot better than she did a couple days ago. So episode 2 of this season, just kidding.
It's a little rough.
It's a little rough, but you know, we're working with what we got here.
We gotta keep going.
The
show doesn't stop.
Andrew's laughing over there. He can't keep it together. It'll be fine.
Yes, it'll be fun. You'll still be able to understand what I'm saying, hopefully.
And let's talk a little bit about. We'll talk a little bit about what we have rocking and rolling tonight. Tonight's episode is called Ordered Hit, and this is a story we were so excited about. We could not wait to get into this one.
It's been on our short list when we kind of reconvened and talked about what are we going to relaunch with. We had some ideas. There was other episodes we were thinking about, but we kind of always went back to this particular case because it was just kind of unheard of when it happened. Nothing like this had really happened in the state. And for it to be a police officer just took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, and we don't want to give away too much. We want you to be able to hear it for yourself. So KSAT Insiders, this is the first time anyone outside of the two of us is listening to this. So you're in for a real treat. We want to let you take that first listen of our Texas Crime Stories Ordered Hit. Check it out.
Balcones Heights police officer Julian Pesina was shot to death by 2 masked gunmen.
Money, drugs, gangs, and murder. Not what you'd expect from a police officer.
The new indictment says Pesina didn't just claim membership, he also sold drugs and paid the dime.
The shooting shocked the community and landed 4 men in jail.
An arrest has been made in the murder of Balcones Heights police officer Julian Pesina.
This is Texas Crime Stories, the murder of Officer Julian Pesina.
A little after 10 p.m. on May 4th, 2014, outside of the Notorious Ink tattoo and piercing shop in Balcones Heights, Julian Pesina was supposed to be meeting with Jerry Spooks Idrogo. Both men were members of the gang known as the Texas Mexican Mafia.
The meetup was intended to be Pesina paying the weekly tax or dime he owed to the Texas Mexican Mafia for selling drugs. Instead, it turned into an execution-style murder when 2 men armed with a shotgun and a pistol showed up in a white car and shot him.
But this wasn't your typical gang-related shooting. You see, shielding his iconic gang tattoos was a Balcones Heights police uniform. Pesina was living 2 very separate lives that collided and led to his death.
According to federal court records, Pesina claimed to be a Texas Mexican Mafia member who had not reported to the gang in 6 years. A $6,000 fine he owed was levied as long as he started reporting to gang leadership Jerry Idrogo and Ruben Reyes and selling drugs to members.
During one of those drug deals, Pesina was outed as being a cop. That's when Idrogo and Reyes started investigating Pesina's day job, and a hit was ultimately placed on him. What Pesina didn't know, his fellow officers were also looking into his ties to the Texas Mexican Mafia.
Documents obtained by our KSAT investigators show an officer named Kenneth Ortiz brought up concerns over Pesina with then Balcony Heights Police Chief Henry Dominguez. The concerns were dismissed by Dominguez, but the FBI was already looking into Pesina's shady ties. They had set up secret surveillance cameras and were watching his every move.
The week of Pesina's murders, the FBI was planning on arresting him. Ultimately, 4 men were arrested: Hidrogo Reyes, Alfredo Freddy Lo Cardona, and Jesse J. Santibanez. Cardona and Santibanez were the triggermen. The court cases that followed highlighted the planning put into Pesina's murder and the cutthroat nature of the Texas Mexican Mafia.
Did you know that 1 in 5 people live with a mental illness in the United States? I'm one of these people. Hi, my name is Tally Dolge, and I could not be more excited to bring to you our new mental health and wellness podcast with KSAT called From Living in Silence to Living Out Loud. Each month, we will be bringing together community leaders, experts, and people who are living every day with a mental illness to discuss various mental health and wellness topics. This podcast is designed to continue to open the conversation. Together, we will explore these brave, resilient, and life-changing stories. We can't wait to have you join us. Releasing on all podcast platforms and on KSAT's YouTube page in 2023.
Okay, Leigh, so when we were researching cases, this was a big one that kind of came up because it had so much involved in it. And you never would think an officer of the law would be leading this kind of double life.
Exactly. And I think part of what spurred our KSAT Investigates team to really look into this is the fact that any other time we've seen an officer killed, it is this huge procession. It is a huge loss for the community. People are mourning openly. That didn't happen with this case.
No, I remember I was, working as a producer here and being like, there's something missing here. Why aren't police talking about this? Little did we know at the time the FBI was already involved, and it then just kind of trickled from there. But I really want to talk first about the Texas Mexican Mafia. I got to speak with Bexar County DA investigator and gang expert Anthony Rodriguez. He spoke to us about this gang, and here is a little more background to just kind of give you a setup of what we're dealing with here.
So the Texas Mexican Mafia is a major prison gang. They could have picked any city in Texas to make their capital, but they picked San Antonio. When the California Mexican Mafia became so large, they chose to branch out. And one of the states they branched to was Texas. Well, because San Antonio convicts were so loyal, there was only one place to make their capital, and that was San Antonio. So they got a guy named Herb Huerta, who is still alive today. He's the lifelong president of the Mexican Mafia. He was ordered to establish a chapter here in Texas, which he did.
So that was very interesting. I had no idea that San Antonio was considered such a big hotspot for the Texas Mexican Mafia. So that was really eye-opening for me. I don't know what, if you had heard that before.
I'd never heard that before. The only real gang knowledge I've known about was through watching different movies and TV shows and documentaries about gang activity, but I had no idea it was so prevalent in our city.
Since then, the gang has since grown a lot through the years, and Anthony goes on to say that they are now what is called a generational gang and like to keep a low profile and are still very active today.
They do not want to garner attention from law enforcement or from the community. In the end, they are still a criminal enterprise. And so they don't want a lot of attention, but they are here. They're when I say they're large, they're now spanning states now, and now they're raising their children into it. And so the gang membership doesn't go away. It now is more strengthened. It's become family. And that makes them very dangerous and very large. What's fascinating for me about them is not only do they speak their own language and they have their own culture and they have their own identity, they live amongst us, and most people aren't aware of it. You know, you go and you go to a barber shop and there they are cutting your hair. I mean, it's just an interesting world that lives amongst us, and most people are unaware of it.
I think it is actually wild to think that this is a generational activity almost to get involved in. You would think that, you know, if mothers and fathers had experienced crime themselves and were getting arrested, they would think you would not want your child to follow in your footsteps. You'd want more for your child. You'd want them to achieve more, to have a different life. But no, they're raising their children to get involved in this.
I think it's all they know almost. It's like a continued cycle. They were raised in it, their kids are raised in it, and now it's another generation being raised in it. So I think how Anthony described it, it makes this gang even more dangerous because they're family. They're family with each other now, and there's so many ties and you know, people involved. But yeah, that was really interesting to see, and also that they like to be, you know, low profile. You don't often see that, but it just shows the amount of, as he kind of explained it, they're their own little world almost of people you wouldn't even expect.
Exactly. And with being so low profile, that's another reason why Pesina was kind of viewed as a threat to that gang, because he was openly showing his gang affiliated tattoos on Facebook.
Yeah, which is not supposed to be something that is done, and you don't want to draw attention to yourself. And then I think when other people started finding out, oh, he's also a cop, big red flags on both ends. I mean, even some of his fellow officers were already raising questions, and the FBI was already looking into him, and now you have the gang looking into him. So he was kind of getting it from both ends.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of what also makes this gang culture so prevalent is the fact that it's hard to get out of that gang culture. And then those gang members do ultimately become targets to their own gang, their own family gang that they're a part of. And that's kind of what we saw happen with these court cases and the 4 men who we saw arrested as a result of this case.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit on each of them. So Hidrogo was the driver of the white car that pulled up the day of Pesina's death. He also helped organize this alleged hit. Hidrogo had fled San Antonio, was ultimately arrested in Toledo, Ohio. When he was arrested, he agreed to testify against Cardona and Santibáñez. Now, while on the stand, he also admitted to murdering Billy Padilla, another Texas Mexican mafia member who was killed in 2013 for failing to turn over drug money. Hidrogo was sentenced to 20 years federal prison in 2017. So, I mean, obviously there's a respect there, but there's also not a respect there, because they're willing to kill somebody who's also a member of this gang if they're even crossed slightly.
Exactly. It ultimately comes down to money over allegiance to another person. And that's what we saw, I guess, with the Billy Padilla case. It was money over alliance to that other person. And that's not unique to Hidrogo. That's also happened in Reyes's case. So Reyes, who is also known as Menace, pled guilty in July 2016 to ordering the hit on Pesina. Reyes also killed Texas Mexican Mafia member Ulysses Farias in front of his family in October 2013. He also shot and killed Texas Mexican Mafia member Mark Lefty Bernal, Carlos Worm Chapa, and Johnny Smiley Solis in January 2014. All of those men were Texas Mexican Mafia members. In 2016, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. So again, more on that gang-on-gang crime that we're seeing in the Texas Mexican Mafia.
So as I'm hearing this, because we're probably throwing a lot of names out of people, you're like, who is who, what is what? Reyes was ultimately the person who ordered the hit.
And helped organize it with Hidrogo. So they were working together. So once they were told that Pesina was a cop, they started investigating that, working together, and then that's when they said, we're going to move forward. We need to pick 2 triggermen for this. And then that's how Cardona and Santibáñez were pulled into this crime against Pesina.
And they too were found guilty in 2017 of one count of murder in aid of racketeering and one count of discharging a firearm during a murder in aid of racketeering. The day of Pacina's murder, Santi Banez and Cardona ambushed him outside of the tattoo shop. It was caught on camera, shown in court. After the shooting, the pair went to Cardona's then girlfriend's apartment to change clothes, wash off, and clean off the gun. Court records show that they studied Pacina's route and dug a hole. They even dug a hole to bury him in. Both men were sentenced to life in federal prison. Now, this is kind of when these court documents started coming out, and as well as when the trial, we started getting these details that we didn't know about before. And I mean, I don't even think at the time we knew that they had dug a hole to bury him. I mean, of course, that didn't happen because it happened in front of the tattoo shop, but
it was meticulous. They did not go into this blind. They did not go into this haphazardly. No, Pacina was drawn out by a Drogo saying you need to pay the dime. That's why he was in front of the tattoo shop. And then Idrogo drove the two other men in that white vehicle. So this was an organized hit on Pacina. And it came out also in trial that once Santi Banez and Cardona were done with the crime, they wiped off that gun and gave the guns to Reyes to dispose of. So all of this was so connected and so well organized between the four of them that if one went down, they were all going to go down for this.
And they didn't know at the time, the FBI was already conducting surveillance. And I think that's why this case was able to be solved so quickly, because there was that camera that was set up outside of that tattoo shop already watching Pacina, but yet they see this hit take place almost days before they were actually going to arrest him. So there's your evidence in court. And it's no wonder that, Idrogo, was like, hey, I will testify against the other. You kind of have me on camera doing this. And all this court records revealed just how intricate this was.
Exactly. And Idrogo was already on the run to Toledo, Ohio, getting away from the other Texas Mexican Mafia members who were then going to take him out. So he was running, he was scared and said, hey, I'll help you out, feds. Don't worry. I'll testify into this. And so he's safely in jail for the next 20 years.
20 years. That's all he got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And was it federal prison?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like your regular Texas state.
Exactly. But honestly, that's probably a safer bet for him to be in there than on the streets in San Antonio with other gang members looking to take him out.
Yeah, so I asked Anthony about this case. He wasn't too familiar with the Pacina case. It wasn't a case that he handled. But as far as, the specific details, but he did offer some insights I thought that were interesting.
The Mexican Mafia specifically, and there's a lot of prison gangs like this, have a saying. And the saying is there's only one way in and only one way out. The other saying is, blood in, blood out. And so what that basically means is you're going to have to commit violence to get in, and it's going to be violent to get out. I'm unclear as to why he was murdered, but that particular lifestyle is very common for those members to end up, the victim of some sort of violent crime. In the end, they're people like the rest of us, although they are criminals by definition. Generally, they have their own agenda, which does not become part of your agenda unless you enter that world. And this officer is a great example of that. He is somebody who entered that world, and we see what happened.
I asked him if he was ever scared. This is kind of give you an idea. Anthony was an intel investigator. So he spoke with these people. He spoke with them in jail. He got to know some of these gang members. And I was like, are you terrified? Like, that sounds scary. He's like, there's a respect. I don't cross the line. They don't cross the line. We have a respect for each other, and we just kind of know our boundaries.
Exactly. You don't know exactly who you're dealing with, because a lot of these people had been associates, been friends, seeing each other in everyday life, and then they can turn in a second and take someone out.
And he said that's why they kind of live amongst us. He referred to them as everyday people. He's like, but when they take off their shirt, that's when you see the tattoos. They don't flash those tattoos only to people they need to flash them to, so they know who they're messing with. He says, and that's kind of something they've learned as they've talked to them in the prison systems and in Bexar County Jail. So it was very interesting insight from Anthony about how this gang operates and how they work amongst us, and possibly not ever knowing that we could be literally next door neighbors to one.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just the fact that San Antonio is still the hub for it. That just blew my mind when he said that, because I would have never guessed whatsoever. Because they're so active, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again at some point on this podcast or in our newscasts at some point, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens with it.
Thanks for being with us for the official launch of Texas Crime Stories. We'll be back next week with a whole new episode.
Well, that was episode 1, and
Yes.
KSAT Insiders, you're the first ones to hear it, so thank you for being here. We want to know your thoughts on it and want to know what other stories you want us to cover. So we have an active chat right now on our YouTube, so put in your questions there, engage with us, let us know your thoughts on that episode. What do you want to see more of?
And not just the episode, if you have anything in general about the podcast that you want to know and throw out there for Leigh and I, we're here to answer your questions tonight. A little more extra information on this episode was tattoos was a very big thing for this episode. Anthony talked about it a little bit, how, most of these Texas Mexican Mafia members have tattoos, but flashing them is kind of frowned upon, especially in public.
Exactly, and he was all over Facebook posting his tattoos, and that's, ultimately how his fellow officers and the FBI kind of got clued in on his double life that he was leading. And a lot of people asked, how did they know that he was a cop?
Yeah.
And he was actually recognized during a drug deal that happened by someone who was participating in the drug deal. They said, that guy's a cop. And so then that's how the Texas Mexican Mafia members clued in.
And started snooping around.
And started connecting the dots. They're like, oh my gosh, this person who's been in the
But
Texas Mafia.
it was both ways, because even a fellow officer was like,
exactly. Those tattoos look suspicious.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back to something Anthony says about tattoos. He says, quote, tattoos are most common forms of nonverbal admission, and they are very specific. Tattoos are shown intentionally, and if you know how to read the message, then it's meant for you. So kind of an example of that, he says they're most commonly on the back of the head or on their back. So if someone approaches them from behind, especially in prison, they make sure they see that tattoo, so they make sure they know who they're messing with.
Yeah,
that's very bold.
And we showed you some of those tattoos in this video, and we want to give a shout out to Timmy, our editor, who puts all these together and deals with our mess, because we talk a lot. That doesn't end up
Editing
in the podcast.
is quite the process.
It's a process. So shout out to Timmy for putting all these together, because he does a great job. We talked a little bit about why we did this episode for the relaunch, but how some of the other things, what does it entail putting these together? And a lot of it comes from past reporting that KSAT has done. We look at our past stories that have been conducted. We look at the past work our reporters, producers have all put together. Our KSAT Investigates team. We look at a lot of what they've done and pull that reporting in, as well as doing our own independent reporting, asking, SAPD has worked with us on stories, and they've done interviews on stories that we've included in this podcast. So it's really utilizing those resources once we pick a topic. And Erica's great at picking the topics, because I'm not good at organizing, but Erica's great at it. And so that's how we really focus into creating each of these episodes.
Yeah, and I want to bring Rocio in. She is our KSAT Insider Guru, who's been on the live chat with us. And Rocio, do we have any questions yet from any of our viewers?
Yes, so the first question would be, how did the Mafia know that Julian Pacino was a cop?
So that first question, if you didn't hear it, was how did the Texas Mexican Mafia know he was a member, he was a cop? So Leigh, you kind of researched on this a little.
Yeah, that really ultimately came from that drug exchange, that drug deal that Julian Pacino and another member of the Texas Mexican Mafia were a part of. They were selling drugs to another Texas Mexican Mafia member, and that member recognized Officer Pacino as being a police officer for Balcones Heights. And with that, they started talking. Drogo started doing some research with Reyes, and they verified, yes, he is in fact a Balcones Heights police officer, and they decided, yeah, we're going to take this person out. They started organizing that hit, and then that's when they started contacting Santi Banez and the other member. And
well, what I found really interesting when we were doing the research for this episode and then talking with Anthony, there is no way out of this gang without some kind of violence. Yeah. Whether it's mostly a lot of this violence, they were killing their own Texas Mexican mafia members. They had admitted to other murders. So it was something that if you're part of this gang, I think Anthony said it in. It's blood in, it's blood out.
A violent act in and a violent act to get you back out of it. And we saw a lot of that member-on-member crime, especially during the court cases when people were talking about other crimes that they had committed when it came to them facing sentencing in the court for the murder of Officer Piscina. So we saw a lot of that. That was very prevalent. Rocio, any other questions?
So I'm bringing a question from insider Adam Trevino. He shared any future episodes you can tease at this moment.
So this is from Adam Trevino. He asked, is there any other episodes we could tease? Well, Adam, we have a lot of episodes we could tease.
Yes.
The next one we're diving into is that of the infamous railroad serial killer, Angel Hernandez. And what's different about this episode is for the first time we're going to hear from the woman who was the only survivor of one of his attacks, Holly Dunn.
And what also makes this story so unique is because before we were focusing on South Texas crimes. This serial killer, Hernandez, he had crimes that spanned several different states. He was killing people along railroads a lot of times, but other times in their homes. And it's something we really get into the details of, talk about some of those victims, and then hear from Holly herself about her story of survival. And it's an episode you don't want to miss, hearing from her and the way that she was able to survive this person. It's incredible.
Yeah, and some other episodes we kind of have on the list, because we do have a big list that we like to tackle. We have meetings, we talk about what's coming up. We're going to talk about the creation of the Amber Alert.
Right.
And the death and the unsolved murder of Amber Hagerman.
Right, so we've all heard about Amber Alerts. You get the alert on your phone, it pops up, it rings your watch. We all hear about Amber Alerts. So we're talking about how an Amber Alert was actually created, and that was because of a little girl named Amber up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so we're going to really dive into her case, and her case is still unsolved. And we're going to hear from the officers who are still working on her case, and then also her mom who lost her little girl. So that's going to be one we're really excited for.
And another one that's on the line, it's going to be a part 2 from South Texas Crime Stories. We talked about one, David Ortiz, who was the Border Patrol serial killer. If you've been following along with our coverage here, our court coverage, his trial was just here in San Antonio in December. So we're going to do a part 2 of that episode and talk about that trial, talk about that testimony, and then that confession that he did, detailed confession, and that interrogation video. So we'll bring in, I'm only allowed so much time to tell, our viewers what's going on in court for a newscast. This is going to expand on that trial coverage.
Absolutely. Rocio, any other questions we have here?
Yeah, so from Ethan, she asked, was Piscina already in the Mexican mafia when he applied to be a officer?
So we got a question that's asking, was Piscina already in the Texas Mexican Mafia when he applied to be an officer? And I'm not exactly sure on the timeline of when he was an officer and when he was first inducted into the Texas Mexican Mafia. That's something we can do a little bit more research on this end. And
I know from the court documents that we have, from the indictments that we did, it didn't look like the information was kind of dug into.
Right.
I just know they were concentrating at the time. No, he's in the Mexican Mafia right now.
Right.
Because that FBI investigation was already launched. They were already surveillancing him. So I know from the court indictments and from what we heard in court, I'm not sure how much of that was detailed in
Right, and he had years inside of the Texas Mexican Mafia. Some of those court documents had talked about there was like a 6-year lapse from his time of first being active to when they started asking him for the dime, the weekly payments when it come to that drug money. So that he was in the Texas Mexican Mafia for years, but we can always look into when he became a Balcones Heights police officer at first.
I also want to thank Anthony for joining us in this episode. He was incredible source for this episode. Anthony had a lot of background and intel into prison gangs and Texas gangs, and he himself has spent time talking to members of this gang, and his knowledge was just so important, I thought, to this episode, and added a lot of knowledge. Like, I didn't know this was the capital for the Texas Mexican Mafia until he said that.
Right, exactly. Any other questions that we have?
Yes, I have one question. Do you have an episode that has stood out to you or one you're really proud of?
So that question was if we have an episode that's really stood out to us or one that we're really proud of. You know, one that I think was really interesting for me was when we got SAPD detectives to join us. And this was a case of a serial killer here in San Antonio.
That was the one I was pulling up too.
Yeah, the Strangler.
San Antonio Strangler.
Yeah, and we had 2 SAPD current detectives now really give us an in-depth look at how they investigate these cases. And knowing that one of them is the only FBI Quantico trained investigator
Profiler
in the state.
He is a criminally trained profiler with SAPD, and he worked with the Texas Rangers, he worked with the FBI, he did some training in Florida to become a criminal profiler, and he is the only one with those kinds of certifications in the state of Texas, and we have him here in SAPD. So we were able to talk with him and another detective on this case, and they had the first murder by the San Antonio Strangler, Johnny Avalos, and also the last murder committed by Johnny Avalos before he was caught. So it was interesting to pick their brains about this and talk about what goes on in their investigation. And typically the way it works for SAPD and with detectives, they get a case, it's the next person up, they get that case of whether it's a murder or whatever it is. And they don't typically work together on these, but those detectives were so intuitive and they were able to find there were similarities in their cases they were looking at. And then that's when they started to collaborate, and that's when the pieces started to line up and they could find who this person was and find it wasn't just one murder that Avalos had committed, it was several murders that he had committed. And you know, something we've always focused on with these cases is talking about the victims. So, those victims, Natalie Chavez, she was only 15 years old when Avalos killed her. There was also Celia Lopez, Genevieve Ramirez, and Rosemary Perez. Those were his victims. Those were the lives that he ended with the crimes that he committed. You know, he was a dishwasher that stalked his victims and he strangled them to death. And there were so many women that got away from him. And it was unfortunate that those 5 lives were ended.
Yeah, and I think another one that stands out to me too, Leigh, is when we did that in-depth Taco Land murders.
Right.
I mean, it was a big case here, and this was the first time I got to interview somebody on death row, which was an experience in itself. But just to hear from that other person's, you know, their side of the story, you know, you could take it with a grain of salt. Of course, he claims he didn't do this murder, but to also get to know and shine spotlight on one of the victims of his murders that wasn't really talked about before, which was Doug Morgan, which was one of the victims from that bar that night. He was the doorman, but to hear from one of his friends about the type of person he was, it was really touching to me for us to add that element that hadn't been shared before.
And another one that pops into my head, this is one that was like an Erica passion project that you just like nailed it on, and it was so good. The Satanic Panic. We did a 3-part series on Satanic Panic, and
I got into a rabbit hole. Like, I started researching this and I was like, wait, this was in San Antonio?
Yeah.
So I got wind of a hearing that was happening here for a man who was wrongfully convicted, and his son was the one that testified against him at 10 years old, saying his dad was in a satanic cult. And then all these years later, his son is on the stand again saying, I lied.
Yeah.
My dad wasn't. And it was all a part of that Satanic Panic craze in the late 80s, early 90s. So we really broke down with those 3 episodes what this was about, the people who it affected, and then talking to Ana Vasquez.
Oh my gosh, she was awesome. Yeah, I want to sit down and have lunch with her one day. Ana, if you're listening, we want to have lunch with you. She was a part of the San Antonio 4 women who went to prison for years for a crime that they did not commit. And it all had to do with the Satanic Panic. And we don't want to give away too much because we want you to go back and listen.
Yes.
And you can listen to these anywhere you get your audio. If you like Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your audio, you can find all of these, and you give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. Thank you. Also, you can go to KSAT.com and click on our Texas Crime Stories tab, and then that's where you can find everything, plus all the videos that Timmy, again, shout out to you, putting all those together. So.
And then,
you
of
can
course,
pick
here
your
on
favorite,
YouTube,
too.
we have a YouTube playlist on our KSAT page. Rocio, do we have any more final questions? No, we're good? Okay, awesome. So before we go, I do want to say we have a link on this live stream for a chance to win some Monster Jam tickets for our insiders. Make sure you register for that. And this Ordered Hit episode will be out for all of you to listen on Tuesday. I want to thank you guys all so much for joining us. It was exciting. It's a lot of work, but we love doing this. And to see it grow that as much as it has, and less than a year, it'll be a year in April, it's very exciting. So I also want to thank Valerie for helping us put this together, and Rocio, and William directing over there.
And Andrew for just being the best ever.
Thank you guys, our insiders, so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
And joining us on this journey as we continue to do true crime podcasts for KSAT 12.
Yep, and if you ever have an idea, you can reach us on social media. We have emails. Let us know what other stories you want covered. We have a long future for Texas Crime Stories. We're going to have a lot of crimes that we want to cover, and we want to hear from you.
I'm looking for a Fiesta medal.
Fiesta medals, yes. We have
need
ideas
Greg
for Fiesta medals. It's going to be us, and it's going to be an outline. And you can get those. Our bosses, if you're listening, we want those.
We want those.
And we want to float.
And a float. Lee's gone.
I want to float.
We'll
Get us
see.
a float.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It's going off the rails, so thank you for joining us. Good night.
Bye.